Hello and welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to Exploring Intersections, and this is our first episode for 2023. So those of you that are joining us live, want to wish you a very happy new year. Hope your new year has started off well. I'm your host, Meenakshi Iyer. I'm the founder and principal of Northstar Solutions and Services, a boutique future work-oriented coaching, training, and consulting practice. Since we are a virtual business, we have the honor and pleasure of working with clients globally. So Exploring Intersections is a space that I've created, and it's a live stream space that I've created dedicated to unpacking intersections as we co-create a future of work that works for everyone. And so those of you that have joined us live, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And those of you that will watch the recording, we hope you find value in this conversation. And I have a special guest here today with me, all the way from South Africa. So I'm going to bring them in a minute. Before that, a little bit of housekeeping. I noticed that it said LinkedIn is having an error going live. So I invite all of you to find us on YouTube or Facebook. So if you look for Northstar Solutions and Services, you can find us there going live at the moment. If you're on LinkedIn, I invite you to switch to YouTube or Facebook. So I'm getting this error. So we've got our one big tech glitch out of the way, so I'm sure the rest of this will go smoothly. So without further ado, I'd love to bring in my guest for today, Kevin Birtz. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time to be here with us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I know this is doing this is familiar space for both of us. So how I met Kevin is through a virtual platform, and I think it was Coffee Chat where we first met, which is a digital coaching platform.
Yeah.
We met, I think, in about 3 years ago or so. It was 2020 that we met. And Kevin is a fantastic coach and NLP trainer. He wears many hats, and no pun intended. I see you wearing a hat today. And he's an entrepreneur. So he's a founder of Leadership by Design. He's an organizational solutionist, and he has his own podcast called Lunchtime Series. And I've had the pleasure of being on your show a couple of times. Once in I think 2020, and once earlier. Late last year. I remember last time we talked about self-promotion as a leadership skill. So we've been in touch for, I want to say, over the last two and a half years, and we've learned from each other and exchanged a lot of notes. And so it's my absolute pleasure to have you here today. And this rather interesting intersection that we're going to talk about today, race and identity. And this came up in one of our last conversations, given that, Kevin, you live in South Africa, and I remember us talking about how was your lived experience as a white male, and with the history of that South Africa has and things like that. So I'm so grateful to you that you agreed to talk about this, and it's a rather sensitive topic, and I know it's personal for you as well. So I'm very grateful that you're sharing your time with us. I invite you to introduce yourself in greater detail. Tell us what you do and how you got into coaching.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for the wonderful, warm introduction. Yeah, so Leadership by Design has been a company, we've been around for the last 8 years. We design leadership solutions that impact organizational cultures. And we specifically look at how do we pack leadership so that, whatever we do in that environment, that it sort of permeates into the environment and sort of flows down into the rest of the organization. We also look at starting strongly within 2023. One of the themes that we're looking at Leadership by Design is the future of work. And what that is. And for us, there's 5 critical primary skills that the future of work will need. And then obviously, you know, the last thing, as you mentioned, is coaching and really getting, you know, people and teams and executives to really perform at their best and really interrogate them to be able to do what they do. But I'm absolutely, I'm very honored to, you know, have this conversation, because I think in the last 2 years, we've sort of been working with a corporate quite specifically around race and identity and biases and inclusivity, and trying to move away from that usual diversity, equity, inclusion conversation, because very often in South Africa, it becomes a bit of a tick box exercise, right? So if they know they employ so many Black people, so many colored people, so many Indian people, and guys, colored people in South Africa, that's not blasphemous, it's not rude. We, you know, that's what we actually coin them as colored nation in our country, and they quite proud of that word. But essentially, you know, looking at all those areas and kind of going, instead of having a tick box exercise, how do we actually have very difficult conversations about race, identity, and your own biases, and how do we have those difficult conversations without going to war in a board? And I think that's why, you know, when we started having this conversation about what is, you know, race and identity really look like for me, you know, from my perspective, I was born into white privilege, right? In South Africa, you know, I was born into white privilege. I went to a white school, and to me, it didn't dawn on me that you know, I was, you know, born into white privilege. I was just, you know, it was just a normal child having a normal childhood, until apartheid at that time was being demolished. My mom said to me, I have to sit you down. We have to sit at the dinner table. And then she realized, you realize that there's going to be no more apartheid. And I said to her, yeah, okay. And normally when my mom sat me down at the dining room table, it was a serious conversation. And the moment she did that, it really dawned on me that there was something about what she understood about apartheid and what I understood about apartheid to be two different things. And I still asked her when we sat down at the table, and she said, you know, do you realize that this is going to be abolished now, and you're going to have Black people in your schools with you? And I was like, I still remember thinking, yeah, I don't know what the big deal is. So why are we sitting down at the dining room table to have this conversation? And then she said, do you understand what that means? I'm like, well, not really. And then I asked her, should I be afraid of something, right? And then in that moment, I quite specifically remember, because in South Africa, we were fortunate to have a nanny and someone who looked after me. And my nanny was just, she was a Black lady, and she was like my family to me. Like she made me food. She looked after me every day. She clothed me, everything, right? So you're kind of going, okay, but like, what's the problem? She's like family to us. She like eats here, she lives here, and everything. But that one conversation we had at the dining room table, I realized there is something here that is being given meaning that I have not prescribed meaning to. And that's why when you and I had this conversation, I mean, I'm going to sound all long-winded, so please interject wherever you want to.
No, this is very poignant, what you're sharing. And you know, what came up for me is, I'm curious, how old were you when your mom had this conversation?
I was probably just going into like grade 9. So I was probably around 13, 14 years old. So I'd already known that, you know, we had the segregation. I didn't understand why we had it, but I knew that it was there. And I knew now that, you know, there was not going to be segregation. And my family, though, my parents, they were pretty fearful that, you know, there would be riots and there would be a whole bunch of stuff. And yet there wasn't. There was no riots. There was no, when sort of apartheid was abolished. It was for me, at that point, I kind of realized there is definitely a different mindset that I sort of came into the world with, that I did not share, that my parents did have.
Mm. Mm.
And I think the race and identity, I think fast tracking forward, like to a couple of years ago, to Black Lives Matter.
Mm.
Everybody had such an opinion, and white people would go on the rant that yes, white people matter and Indian people matter, and I'm going, I was sitting back going, no, but you're actually missing the point. The point isn't that Black people are more important. The point of the message is, do you recognize that the identification of Black lives matter? And the only reason I know that, because as an adult man today, I'm an adult white gay man, right?
Mm.
And I realized, being an adult white gay man in South Africa, I am the minority today. I'm not the majority. Although I was born into a wonderful privileged life, today I'm not as privileged. And I only recognized this when I'd come out and I'd been gay and I'd started going into corporate environments, and I would sometimes mention something about being gay, and the kind of reactions that people had in a boardroom, about me saying, you're gay, like they'd have that kind of real weird expression about it. And then I started realizing, when you walk into an environment and you do not identify with what it is you're seeing in front of you, it makes you the minority, plain and simply, right? And that's why it's such an important conversation. That's why we've developed a program, the Unconscious Bias and Inclusivity program that we have, based on the fact that not only do I understand that race and identity are very important factors to consider when having an organization and how the organization functions, what that means for diversity, equity, inclusion, what that means for the bottom line of the organization, and how having a healthier, diverse input in an organization, the impact that can have on an organization. And there's already, PwC's got some great work that they've done around biases and inclusion, and when you have a look at that, you start realizing, maybe, this diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of phrase that we throw around, far more to it than what we realize. Because, when I walk into an organization and I don't know that anyone there is gay, I'm immediately the minority. Yeah. So I don't have a conversation around anything that sort of interests me, or that would make me look like the oddball out, because whatever stereotypical kind of ways that we sort of assume things would happen. It's the same, and I've spoken to a lot of women about this, and especially women of color, how, because they're sometimes in a boardroom at an executive level, there's an unspoken expectation of women to get up and make everyone coffee.
Yeah.
And you're kind of going, but why? Why don't you make your own coffee? Why don't you get up and make coffee? Why is there this? And it's a very minor little thing, right? It's not a major thing, but I think there's an injustice that's being done with the underlying tones of innuendo and sort of suggestion that people completely don't see, especially when you are the minority.
Absolutely. There's first of all, I want to acknowledge and applaud your courage and your vulnerability in sharing your personal story. And I think that I think it's so valuable for folks in different parts of the world to hear this and understand what race and identity looks like in other geographies, right? So in the US, for example, which is where I'm currently based, I'm originally from India, as you know, and the US has been my home for the last 14 years. And So number one, I can relate to a lot of what you shared in terms of your experience as a child, the privilege that you had in your upbringing, and then how things started shifting. Now in your adult life, how you went from being in the majority to, or having that majority privilege to now being in the minority in a certain way. And I
Yeah.
loved how you defined what does that being in a minority really mean? And anyone can feel like that. It depends on, it's totally context driven, right? So,
Yeah.
and your environment driven. And I also wanted to call out, oh, by the way, we are back on LinkedIn as well. So that glitch got
Fantastic.
fixed already. Yeah. So we are live on LinkedIn. So folks, if you're just joining us, this is the first episode of Exploring Intersections for 2023, episode 14 overall. And we are talking about race and identity with our guest, Kevin Birtz, who's an entrepreneur, a coach, and a podcaster. And is based in South Africa. So we're talking about Kevin's lived experience at this intersection of race and identity, and everything that you've shared so far, Kevin, it's poignant, it's impactful, and I wanted to call out the Black Lives Matter piece. Yeah, so I've struggled with that as well, and in fact, I've talked about this a couple of years ago on another podcast, and the thing is that. I think I saw this on LinkedIn, and folks said somebody was responding to a comment because there was this thing around all lives matter, exactly like how you were saying, right? So,
Yeah.
and then somebody made a comment on that post or message that, hey, it's like all houses need attention on the street, but you're going to focus on the one that's on fire. So do you get it? And that analogy, that metaphor, it just unlocked things for me.
Yeah.
And that was a big moment of learning for myself, and that's what came up for me as you were sharing your thoughts on that, and on that debate, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing that people don't understand why gay people have gay pride, right? People immediately assume, oh, it's gay people want to be out there, they want to be in everyone's faces, they're trying to make a point of who they are, they're trying to be obnoxious, they're trying to dress up weirdly, and none of that applies to why we have gay pride. The reason why gay people have gay pride is purely based on identity, to kind of say we are part of society. Whether you understand it, whether you accept it, whether you like it, whether you don't like it, the point is it's a recognizable group of people who are not the same as just everybody else. And it's definitive to those people. And how we go about sort of having a party just to celebrate who the hell we are. If straight people wanted to do it, go ahead, go and celebrate your life, right? I don't mind. It's like, go, yeah, celebrate being straight. But essentially, that's what gay pride's about. It's about, do you recognize the identification of the differences that that make up the human race, right? You're just, at the end of the day, you're human. And part of and this is what's so beautiful about the unconscious bias training is, creating psychological safety, going through the training. And part of the training that we take people through is we really want people to understand that there's a moment in the training that we take time to actually just see the person sitting opposite you. And when you're doing that and you're kind of seeing them, what starts happening, and it's so beautiful to see and witness, and you see it in real time. So for just 2 minutes, you have two strangers sitting with each other and just looking at each other without saying a word. And in those 2 minutes, you'll suddenly see how those people sort of start noticing that this person has a certain type of skin, they have a certain kind of facial feature, they wear glasses or they don't wear glasses. Then they suddenly see the eyes and they start seeing deeper into that person's life. And they go, it seems to me like you might be sad about something, or it seems to me like you're not your usual self at the moment. And suddenly for 2 minutes that you just sit there with identifying this human opposite you, whether they're man or woman, whether they're gay or straight, whether they're pink, purple, or brown, whoever they are, you're sitting there opposite a human. And when you're doing that, it's just beautiful to see how their narrative changes, their comments change, their recognition of a human changes.
Yeah.
And I think, that's why when you said, this is a conversation you want to have, I was like, I don't speak about race and identity at all. I don't know why we should I was like, not sure why you, and then when I started thinking about it, I was like, no, actually we do. I'm far more passionate about it than I realize, I think, because we are, at the end of the day, when you unbox everybody and you take away the labeling and you just put them in a group and you say, like, tell me about your childhood, tell me about your struggles, tell me about your upbringing. We are far more similar in life than we are different. And we have far more similar stories than we have different stories.
That's so true. Yeah.
Mental health and emotional struggles and bad relationships or great relationships or, great wisdom from parents and parents who divorced. Everybody has those stories. Doesn't matter what color, what race, what identification you have, all of them are equal.
I had to put that down. What you said, we are far more similar to each other than different. That is so true, Kevin. And thank you for sharing that. And, I am so grateful that you agreed to have this conversation. And I know it is sensitive, it's difficult. And there is also, I personally think about it. So when I talk about this, I think about what potential there is for backlash, right? Of being misunderstood. And especially in this world of trigger happy social media world that we live in.
Yeah.
And so I remember the first time I started talking about this, it was hard. And I think it was easier for me to do this because it was like only my audio was recorded. It wasn't live and I shared it for a podcast.
Yeah.
But I still don't. And as you said that, it made me think about it. I still don't talk about it as much as I think I should. So I know you've alluded to this quite a bit, but how would you summarize, what does this intersection mean to you of race and identity?
Well, I think it's led me to become who I am today in the world and what I do for a living, being on this side of, growing up in a very religious household, growing up with very staunch, religious, strict parents, and knowing that, as a youngster with 4 older siblings, what I understood to be true or to be normal, inverted commas, was to get married, to have children, to have a happy life. And then, that's what life was about. And instinctively, from a very early age, I kind of just disagreed with that. And I think all of those experiences, from being very religious to kind of going, well, I don't understand why I have to, live in a church all the time and, not really getting anything from it. Where I used to sing a lot and I used to, and the church would literally say, you can't go and sing out in the world. You have to do it here, because if you do it anywhere else, you won't be blessed. Living with that kind of narrative, and then coming out as gay and then having a child as well and having been married and divorced through that. So there's a lot of sort of elements that have led to this point in my life. But I think, what that has given me is, because on the podcast, on the Lunchtime Series that you mentioned, I spoke to a wonderful lady who once used the line, I can't think of her name now, Marjorie Saluson. I think it's Marjorie Saluson. And she said, Kevin, never forget that your mess is your message.
I remember you sharing that. Yes.
Yeah, right. And then the moment I remember when she said that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, Yeah, like we have messes. We have these messes that we sort of collect in our lives, and we kind of go, well, this is who I am, and it's not ideal. But that's exactly the message, right? Your mess is your message, because at the end of the day, what can I do and what can I share? I can share that I've been on the other side of homophobia, right? I can't walk down the road, even in South Africa. We have legalized marriage in South Africa for all gay people. I cannot walk down the road holding my boyfriend's hand or my fiance's hand and feel comfortable that no one will make some kind of remark. Some places you can, most places you can't. You can't be a Black lesbian in South Africa because they are, as a statistic, sadly, one of the highest rape cases that you find in South Africa is Black lesbian females. And then you kind of go, that's traumatic. That's
Yes.
really bad. So, and I've been on the other side of that homophobic kind of slurs, and been the minority in an environment where everybody's straight and I'm completely gay, and I'm kind of going, okay, I don't fit in with anybody here. This is just weird. I don't feel comfortable, right? And I think that's sort of where it's led to, is being able to, first of all, educate myself and understand what are our brains doing instinctively. And that's the thing about biases. Biases teach us that everybody is biased. If you have a brain, you're biased.
Bias. Yes, I use that a lot.
So, to try and kind of go, oh no, I'm not biased. I'm like, no, you're biased. It's like, it's an unconscious thing that we do. The only way that we mitigate biases is by educating ourselves and really taking reflection on ourselves of how do I mitigate what I'm doing, or the decision-making processes that I am making. What are they, and how do I tap into that more consciously? That's how you start mitigating bias. And do I have check mechanisms? Do I have a buddy system to kind of go, so this is the decision I've made. What do you think from your perspective? And make sure your buddy is not you, or like looks like you, or sounds like you, or is the same skin color. Get a whole different person to give you a different perspective. And another thing I would really say to people out there is to expose yourself to diversity, for example.
Yep.
Make it your business to find out. I mean, you and I, when we first met, I was like, I think we did the program, I Am Remarkable.
I'm Remarkable on Coffee Chat. Akua did that. Yes.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned a few things, and I was like, this is a really interesting person. I want to speak to you. And that's how I got on LinkedIn and messaged, because I think, and strange enough, one of the articles that I come across in the last 2 months that Forbes.com shared was as a leadership skill where leaders really should be paying attention to at the moment. The skill is being curious.
Yes.
And if you could cultivate curiosity in everything you're doing, in the people you're working with, in the environment, into the why, into the how, into the when, into the why does that make sense to this person like that, and become absolutely curious about that, that's when you're actually doing yourself a favor, and you're doing everybody a service by paying attention and making them aware that they matter and that they are seen.
Yeah.
Only when you become curious can that happen.
Absolutely. Wow, that's a lot of wisdom that you shared, and so much to unpack there. And we are heading to the midpoint of our conversation here today on exploring intersections. And I invite folks that are watching us live, either on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, pop in if you have questions or comments. Let us know where you're joining us from. And if you're going to watch the replay, we would love to hear your thoughts. And if you have questions, you know where to find Kevin and I. So today we are talking about race and identity, and Kevin has been sharing his personal story and his own lived experience at this intersection. The next thing I wanted to chat with you about, Kevin, is really, you've alluded to quite a bit of this already, about what your lived experience has been like at this intersection. And I know there's a bit of an arc, if you will, from when you were a child to a teenager to an adult. What's the one thing that you think has been a constant at this intersection, at the intersection of race and identity for you?
Probably that, and I know it's going to sound a bit, maybe it's going to sound a bit usual or, like mentioned before. But being abnormal is absolutely wonderful. Just being abnormal is the moment you take that abnormality and you really shine a light on your abnormality and use the abnormality as your personal power and your personal strength, as your superpower for that matter. That's when you really start tapping into your own identification of who you are. And I remember growing up as a teenager, when anyone used to sort of call people names, and you had bullies at school and say, "Oh, Kevin, you're so gay," because apparently, like as you see, I speak with my hands, right? And because I spoke with my hands, people was like, "You're so gay because you always speak with your hands," and I'm going, "What? Like I mustn't speak with my hands?" I'm like, "What do you mean? And how does that make you gay?" So for me, I didn't have any reference as a teenager to what does it mean to be gay. Like I didn't have someone I identified with to kind of go, "Oh, this person's just like me. I relate to them." So it's until I realized that my abnormality was completely normal, and that was my superpower. I even considering my relationship that I had with my own personal family, I was the oddball out. I was the only singer in my family. I was the only one that made singing a career in my 20s. I was the only one that found myself on stage and doing. Although I'm quite the introvert. People wouldn't believe that, but so the abnormality of being unusual. That in itself became my superpower, and stepping into it, I look at the core belief. At 26, I was coined as clinically depressed by my psychiatrist, and I was like, no, wait a minute, there's nothing about me that's going to be depressed, and I'm not going to identify with being a depressant. So I went on a very strong sort of against the grain with this sort of this wonderful place that the doctors wanted to sort of identify me as, and I was like, I'm not going to do that. I don't identify that, because I knew my mom suffered from depression, my sister-in-law suffered from depression, and I was like, I don't want to be that. And I went on this journey of understanding NLP. And again, through neurolinguistic programming, there's a lot of understanding what your brain is doing and how your brain is generalizing and distorting and deleting information, and how your brain's really, you have more control of who you are and how your life turns out than you think you do.
Yeah.
And when you understand that, you kind of go, okay, so if I do have more control over that, then what else am I, what potential possibility is there for me to achieve? And again, I bring back the abnormality, because if I look at other NLP practitioners, they kind of very strict to the book, kind of the way that they do stuff. And I just gone down the road of going, no, I want to learn Enneagram, and I want to learn change management and NLP and transformational coaching and all of these practices. And I've put all of that together, and that's, purely based on the abnormality.
Yeah. It goes back to what you had shared earlier, right? With one of your guests that said, your mess is your message, and then own your abnormality. And I think those are such powerful messages. And again, what I like about those messages is that focus on what is in your control. Right, and it really, it's self-empowering. I was wondering if you could share what folks like similar to yourself, or others that find themselves with this similar lived experience at this intersection. What are some things that they can do to, like, one or two things that they can do to overcome their challenges or find opportunities?
I think the number one thing that as an NLP practitioner and as a coach that's been doing this for quite a number of years, I'll give you a story that will make sort of sense to why I say this. I had a coaching client, and she was brilliant. She was a star student at school. She got 2 degrees when she's out of school. She became a coach. She, got married, had kids, had the perfect life, and eventually got divorced and sort of got to a point where she didn't want to get out of bed. And she had seen a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and eventually saw me, I think, on Coffee Chat as well. And she became a coach, and she messaged me one day and she said, I don't want to get out of bed. I'm struggling to get to what I want to do. And I was like, tell me about that. And we sort of started digging into that. Where's this coming from? What is this meaning of, I don't feel fulfilled? Where is it coming from? And as we sort of unpack that for her, the one thing she said, I remember I was 9 years old. I was standing in the kitchen, and my grandmother said, if it wasn't for you, your mother would be so much more successful. And in that moment, she made a decision at 9 years old that sort of meant that for the rest of her life, she would need to prove something to people. She would need to prove herself, right? And the moment she realized that, her life changed. Her life changed around. And, I share that story because I think what we do in life is we give something a meaning. We give meaning to something that's happened, a life event, or someone's opinion, or a mother's, so-called love, because they're trying to protect you. And we sort of make that the rule to sort of, or the measurement stick to everything else in our world. So, when people go through similar things that I've been through, I think really investigate, like introspection, like investigate where's the meaning come from? What is the meaning that you're giving it? And really understand where that meaning's coming from. Because the moment you start there, you can sort of rationalize with yourself to say, well, do I have evidence to prove that this is true? If it's not true, then you can disprove it, right? And if you're kind of going, okay, well, now I'm literally finding evidence to disprove the thing that I've always thought was true, then the opposite of that thing could be true, right? So then your abnormality becomes the superpower, because I first thought my abnormality was my weakness. But when I realized that, no, that was just people's opinion, and that was just people saying bad things or being nasty, I kind of got to a point where I was like, no, wait, my abnormality is what makes me me. My abnormality is the thing that helps me stand in someone's shoes and helps me be empathetic. So when they're talking and when they're needing advice, I can be there with them, and I can recognize that what they've gone through has been so debilitating, right? It helps you practice empathy. Another one is being able to be honest and encouraging with yourself, and courageous with the story that you need to have. And having courageous conversations is hard. That's why it's courageous. But essentially, when you find the right people to talk to, it's an easier conversation. So I would then say, if you've gone through similar challenges and you can't speak to someone about this yet, you just haven't found the right person to speak to. And lastly, one thing that I think is so necessary, and I think and that's why this conversation that we're having today is absolutely so profound and significant and should be spoken about, is holding people accountable and saying that what you're saying is not okay. And whether they agree with you or not, that's cool. They don't have to agree. But the fact that you've put it out there and you didn't keep quiet. Because to me, when someone is racist and I don't say anything, I'm part of the racism. When someone's homophobic and I don't say anything, I condone that behavior. And it's not okay. We as human beings need to be held responsible to the degree that if I don't start with me and start reining it in from people and going, hey, I just want to mention that as much as X, Y, and Z is happening, you're forgetting about X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C this side. I remember one of the conversations, and please correct me if I'm wrong, where you found yourself working in a very male-dominant environment, where you were being excused very often, or undermined, or not even looked upon in your own opinion, right? I mean, I think one of the conversations we've had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say here for a minute that I love the little checklist that you've built. I put that here in comments here. Love what you shared about, introspect, take that time to discover your own story and encourage yourself. I think a lot of us, may hear it often. We hear all these cliche terms, self-care, self-compassion. I think it's very important, though, self-compassion especially. I think we tend to give others more credit than to ourselves, and then we hurt ourselves so much in the bargain. And the importance of having courageous conversations, I could not agree with you more. And then holding others accountable. That was such a practical checklist, I would say. Thank you so much for sharing that. And and to your point, a few things that came up for me is my own lived experience has been at these intersections in identity, and in India, it's been around identity and gender, and so those are the layers, and the caste, right? So I come from my parents, and because of them, right, by birth, I belong to an upper caste. I'm a Brahmin, and I come from the southern part of India, and so that's a part of my identity. My caste is part of my identity, and in India, more often than not, you can find out a lot about a person from their last name, from their surname. And so my surname, you can find out a lot about me. And even before you meet a person, you can guess, okay, these are the languages they may speak. This is the caste, and this is the part of the country they come from. All of these things you can find out about them. You can guess about them because you never know what the reality is until you talk to them, right? So for me in India, my lived experience was at the intersection of caste, gender, and English speaking abilities. That's the other thing, right? So the more proficient you are the English language, it's like a passport to a better life at work and better life in general. So my caste, depending on where I was, can put me at a disadvantage or in a position of privilege. So everything is fluid. That's what I learned really when I sat down and thought about it. And my gender, more often than not, was a barrier. English speaking abilities would put me in a point of privilege. So, but then when I moved to the US, those identities didn't matter here, because here the landscape is different, and it's about race, and it's about skin color. Skin color mattered in India too. It does matter in India too. India is the largest market in the world for skin lightening creams and potions and whatnot. As sad as it is, it is. And so fair skin, you are is a point of privilege, right? So, but here, none of that matters. And on top of that, I'm an immigrant. I have an accent. I have a name that people find it difficult to pronounce. So your sense of privilege, I think it's very flaky, right? And then it also, it's very fluid. It can mean different things. And so I totally, all of that you shared resonate with me. And what really came up for me is when you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and I'm glad you called that out. We tend to use that alphabet soup without really thinking much about what are the different layers. Applying that intersectional lens is so important for us to be successful in really being inclusive and really creating those environments where people feel like they belong. The psychological safety aspect that you talked about. There's so much there, and I know that we can go on and on to talk about this. And I know from our previous two conversations, we've chatted quite a bit about this. So I once again, I'm so grateful that you agreed to have this conversation in public, online, on this forum, and you shared your experiences at this intersection of race and identity. And before we wrap up, Kevin, just want to ask you two things. One is, what are your parting thoughts? What would you like everyone that's watching now and folks that will watch the replay? What's the, if nothing, what's the one thing you would like them to take away from our conversation?
I think that, if you look at the state of the world, we still very much have exclusion as part of a means to empower people somehow. And what we've noticed, and history will show us, that by doing this and trying to exclude people, races, language, we're just finding ourselves in an even more difficult situation. And we look. If I look at South Africa as a country and where we're at, we really, as much as it's coined as democracy, we still don't have a democracy. We just have a lot of angry people right now because we're, whether you're white, black, colored, Indian, whatever, we're just angry. Everyone's angry based on the fact that the government is not delivering what they said they would deliver. And, so you kind of go, okay, so what, like, to your point earlier, what do you have control over? What we have control over is how I decide to show up in my life and how I decide to show up for my fellow person, for my fellow neighbor, for my fellow employee, for my fellow business partner, whatever that is for you. How you show up is vitally important. And it's what the future really requires. The future really requires us to have the agility and the ability to be absolutely more able to be fluid, for lack of a better word, like stealing your word, to be a bit more fluid in how we approach situations and circumstances. Because going about it like we have in the last 100 years just doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's no evidence to prove that's trying to segregate, trying to create laws, and like the U.S. law that they've gone back on, the Roe v. Wade situation, taking away a woman's right with her own body, like that kind of stuff. Like it just doesn't work, right? And we have evidence. There's historical evidence to prove that it doesn't work. So I would encourage people to really, around race and identity, is to sit back and really interrogate yourself and interrogate your own beliefs and your own limiting beliefs, for that matter, around how you see someone based on the fact that they're different than you, how you experience people based on the fact that they're not usual, or they're not something you're used to, right? Just because that's the reason you treat them badly, that's not okay, right? And I think, lastly, I think, again, holding people accountable. If you see a disingenuous person, or see someone who is sort of racist or homophobic or any phobia whatsoever that they sort of trying to impress upon other people, whether they accept it or not, hold them accountable and say, what, it's not okay that you just said that, and it's not okay because there's 7 people in this room that have just been offended by the fact that you said that. It needs to be called out on. So I think it starts with me. And once you can actually get your brain wrapped around that, make sure that that's solid, and then go out and hold yourself accountable and hold people accountable. Because only when we do have these conversations and have these difficult moments of going, yeah, we're different. And then, so what now? Like, okay, what is your version? What's my version? We have to start having these conversations, and we have to actively have them, because that's when we're learning by by understanding people better, because at the end of it, we're just people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin. This was such an impactful, insightful, and poignant conversation. I'm grateful. And I found this quote the other day. Michelle Obama says, "History has shown us that courage can be contagious, and hope can take on a life of its own."
Yeah.
So I thought with everything that you shared, this was just so apt to wrap up our conversation on this note. And again, thank you, everyone. Those that watched us live. Sorry about that glitch on LinkedIn, but you will find the recording there. And the recording is also available on North Star Solutions and Services YouTube channel. It's also available on Facebook. So today we were talking to Kevin Birtz, CEO and founder of Leadership by Design, leadership coach based in South Africa, a host of Lunchtime Series podcast. And come back again in a couple of weeks for more conversations on exploring intersections. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care and be well.
Thanks so much. Cheers for now.
Thanks. Bye.